My name is Vicki Stocks and I'm the Australian Democrats candidate for Bonner. I'd like to thank the people from Big Switch in particular for organising this evening's forum. And in particular, I'd like to acknowledge the hard work and dedication of Hannah Elvery, who is the Bonner coordinator for the Big Switch. Hannah proves that our individual choices really can make a difference. It's great to see you all here tonight. Your presence highlights just how much people's attitudes have changed. I think 10 years ago there were two things that Brisbaneites didn't really care that much about. I think one was AFL and the other was climate change. So it's good to see how much things have changed since then. The Australian Democrats have had their climate change policies rated by both the Big Switch and the Australian Conservation Foundation. The Big Switch gave us a rating of 4.4 out of 5, that was for the party. And the Australian Conservation Foundation gave us a rating of 90 out of 100. So it's fair to say that our policies well and truly address the major issues of climate change. The candidates were given 5 questions tonight, but the main question that I would like to focus on is question 4, which is, do you agree that Australia should not build any new coal-fired power stations and should responsibly phase out our involvement in the coal industry? The Australian Democrats didn't actually receive full marks for this question on the Big Switch survey, so that's why I wanted to talk about it in particular. The Australian Democrats advocate the introduction of a stringent greenhouse emissions factor requirement for new power stations, an emissions trading scheme applying to the generation sector, and an aggressive energy efficiency target. Now, the combination of these policies will result in a dramatic move away and closure of coal-fired power stations. However, if a new coal-fired power station can meet this stringent standard through, for example, capture for carbon capture and storage, then they would be approved. But realistically, no such technology is currently commercial, therefore, in all likelihood, such a power station would not be approved by 2020. Through the introduction of an emissions factor and an aggressive energy efficiency target, as the Australian Democrats strongly advocate, the domestic demand for coal would be significantly reduced. The Australian Democrats advocate an export tax on coal, which would also result in the reduced use of coal. The proceeds of the export tax would be used to fund greenhouse abatement and energy efficiency activities and provide rebates to low-income households affected by increased energy costs. So as you can see, while we didn't receive full marks for our answer to that particular question, we do believe that our policy still adequately addresses the concerns that people have about coal. Besides that one question, the Australian Democrats received full marks from the Big Switch on our response to the remaining 4 questions tonight. There are copies of our climate change, land and water election platform here tonight. I have them, so if you'd like to read them, please come and see me and I'll give you a copy. It outlines the 25 steps that we think need to be taken towards a healthier environment. So on your scorecard there, you can go ahead and put a tick for all the other questions for me, because it is an answer from the Democrats of a resounding yes to all the rest of them. I'd like to talk now about the history of our role in relation to climate change. 30 years ago, when the Australian Democrats formed, we decided right from the beginning to be fiercely anti-nuclear and pro-environment. People didn't really know what to make of it, and for the most part, the major parties didn't take us very seriously. But before long, we made history when in 1982, we made the first legislative attempt to protect the Australian environment with the Rainforest Preservation Agreements Bill. That same year, a lone Democrat politician in the Tasmanian State Parliament single-handedly brought down the Labor government over their attempt to dam the Franklin River. They had been in power in Tasmania for 42 years. At the same time, the Democrats introduced the World Heritage Properties Protection Bill to federal parliament, which was the basis for the ultimate salvation of the Franklin River. Since then, the Democrats have called for reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and a halt to climate change. In 1988, we introduced a private senator's bill called the Ozone Depleting Substances Regulations Bill, which would ban the production and use of ozone-destroying CFCs. That same year, the Democrats initiated a Senate inquiry into climate change. The report, Rescue the Future, Reducing the Impact of the Greenhouse Effect, was tabled in 1991 under an ALP government and identified the link between human activity and greenhouse emissions. In 1999, the Australian Democrats, which included Queensland Democrat Senator Andrew Bartlett, negotiated $400 million for new greenhouse abatement and initiated and chaired another Senate inquiry into climate change, this time under the Howard government. And the report was called The Heat Is On, Australia's Greenhouse Future. This 2001 report was highly critical of the lack of action taken to date by a Labor government and a Howard Liberal government, and also set out 106 recommendations in areas of transport, emissions trading, carbon and the land, energy use and supply, climate change and Kyoto, all of which are still, as we all know, relevant today. It's now 25 years since the Franklin River was saved, and yet we have another Labor state government here in Queensland who wants to dam the Mary River. This time, however, there is legislation already in place at a federal level that could stop this dam. It's called the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, and it was introduced by the Howard government, surprisingly enough, with the help of the Australian Democrats. Queensland Democrat Senator Andrew Bartlett and the other Democrat senators used their balance of power in the Senate to negotiate over 400 amendments to strengthen the EPBCA, despite heavy criticisms from Bob Brown, who said it was, and I quote, the most disgusting sellout of the Australian environment and laws to protect the Australian environment that the Senate has ever seen, and that we were signing a death warrant for the forests. Yet this very same legislation was used by Bob Brown to stop the logging of the Wailanga forest in Tasmania, and will be relied upon from people in this very room to protect local environment interests. The Australian Democrats do not seek to drive a wedge into the environmental debate and alienate the very people who need to be convinced of change. I was shocked to see television footage recently of forestry workers walking through the streets of Tasmania carrying placards that read, "I hate the Greens." Not, "We want a pulp mill," not, "We want more jobs," but "I hate the Greens." We will get nowhere if we expect people to simply bend to our will because we think that we're right and they're wrong. The Australian Democrats have found from our many years of experience that bringing stakeholders together is the key to finding the best outcome. Compromise and negotiation are a part of our everyday lives, and it is no different with governments. It should not be feared or criticised, but rather embraced so that we can move forward with real action. Climate change cannot be ignored, so choose common sense for the environment and vote Democrat. Thanks.
Authorised by James Whelan, The Big Switch, Brisbane.